never seen such desolation. I think we drove for a mile and there wasn't a building hardly standing.
Nobody knew what was going on. They called the situation fluid, but fluid means that nobody knew anything.
It was different. If I had done something else, I don't know what I would have done.
We're talking today with Mr. John Erickson of Lowell, Michigan. The interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Now, Mr. Erickson, can you begin by telling us a little bit about your own background? To start with, where and when were you born?
Oh, I was born in 1929, and on November 26th, and in Hastings Hospital. I was there. Then I been back, come home, and lived over there in Alto all the rest of my life until I joined the service on the farm.
Okay.
I worked on the farm with my dad, and we had 50-some head of cattle, and we had horses, and I used to drive horses all the time, and my brothers used the tractors, and I hauled manure and stuff and went out on the farm.
Now, how long did you stay in school?
Well, I stayed in school until I got in the 5th grade, but then I got my education when I went in the Army, more or less, because I got to have to do things. They sent me to school while I was there, and I learned a few. They passed me as an 8th grader.
But basically, as it was, you stayed. You went to elementary school. You attended through 5th grade, and then you left.
Well, because my brothers would go to school. There were 6 boys and 2 girls, and my dad always had to have one of them home. Well, I'd like to stay home because I wanted to be with the horses because I liked horses. That's why I stayed home. My other brothers, they didn't care one way or another, so they went to school. And I said, Dad said you can go to school later, so that's what I did. But like I said, when I was 14 or 15 and being in the 5th grade, that didn't look very good, you know. So I finished it in the Army. That's how I got the rest of my schooling. But I really didn't get a diploma or anything, but that's how I got my schooling, education.
Now, did you learn a fair amount at home then after 5th grade? So by just doing things you had to do to help work the farm or reading the newspaper, that kind of thing?
I read the newspaper and I read the papers, and that's how I did. And when I went to church, if I didn't know something, I'd ask the pastor or the teacher that was teaching us and what that word went and how it went, and that's how I got through reading the Bible.
All right. Now, while World War II was going on, were you paying attention to those events one way or another?
Well, my brothers went to Art and Paul. They went in the Navy. They went in ahead of me. Paul was younger, 11 months younger than I was, and Art, he was 11 months older than I was. And so that's why, and then when Art come home, I says to Dad said, I'm going to buy this other farm up the road. So when Art come home, I said, well, if he's going to do that, can I join the service and can I be in the Army? And Dad says, well, he'd like to have one of us boys in the Army because he was an Army in World War II.
Well, World War
One,
yeah.
And so I says, Dad, I said, that's what I want to do. So when I got, I was just about 17. It was in November, and my birthday's and I think I went the 10th, and my birthday was the 17th, or the 29th of November. You know, when the 29th of November come, or the 26th of November come, I says to him, I says, I'm definitely going to go in. So we went down to Grand Rapids, and I did. And I said, where do you want to go? The recruiting officer said, and I said, well, I'd like to go to Fort Knox, Kentucky. And he says, okay. So I had to sit down and fill out some forms and papers and stuff. And when I did that, why, he said, okay. So I went down there to Fort Knox, Kentucky, and then you sat up there with a bunch of guys. We all went on a train. We sat up there on top on this beacher, and they kept calling your name off. And when they called my name off, I was next to the last one. And there was 2 other guys that didn't make it, and I thought they would make it, but they took me in place of one of them. And I was surprised, and I told him about me. Well, he says, your schoolwork, you passed everything, and you're adding, subtracting, and multiplying, dividing, and everything. And so I passed it, so that's all they worried about. They didn't care, so
Mhm.
that's how I got in.
All right. Now, did they send you then to Fort Knox for your basic
I
training?
stayed here at Fort Knox, Kentucky, and I finished 13 weeks of basic training. That's a tank battalion.
Mhm.
And so, boy, I really got, but we never got to use the tank battalion, you know, never to use the
Right.
tank because we were infantry more or less over there, and I did a lot of infantry, did a lot of walking and and shooting and blowing hand grenades and stuff like that, learning how to fight, you know.
Right. Now, can you describe a little bit the basic training process? Once you get down to Fort Knox,
Well-
what do they do?
Well, when I got to Fort Knox, where they moved us and we put us in training, they gave us 13 weeks of training. We had to go on walks, and the whole company would take off. We'd go out and be gone overnight in different places and stay overnight, and then we'd walk back. We'd walk 5-10 miles a time, and then we'd have us train and pitch a tent out, and you know, and like we were in the army, dig a hole just like you would a foxhole with the little shovels we had on our backs in our mess gear, and they had us. We ate canned food, you know, the
Right.
stuff, C rations and stuff like that, K rations, whatever you want to call them.
Now, was it relatively easy for you to do a lot of the physical work because you'd spent all that time out on the farm and outdoors?
No, because I was in good shape, so I weighed 185 pounds, and I was in good shape, so I didn't, nothing bothered me. I
Right.
could pick up anything and do anything, and I didn't like a lot of them guys. They had sore feet and stuff, and they couldn't walk, and they had this and that, blisters on their feet. Well, then they told him that I heard them say, turn your socks inside out to some of them soldiers that was there, and so they could continue on. And then we went through water with our shoes and boots, you know, and learned us how that. And then after you do that, you wring them out and with your hands and turn them inside out and different things to do. It learns you how to survive for yourself.
Right.
That's how you had to do. That's what they made you do.
Now, did they put a lot of emphasis on discipline when you were training? Following the orders, following the rules, saluting, all of that?
Orders. They tell you what. We had to be here at a certain time. Do this at a certain time. We have to be. And the first thing in the morning, we had to get up and get ready and get your face and hand washed. Be ready for breakfast at a certain time, and then you get out in the KP line, and then you had dishes to do. If you your name was picked, you had to wash pots and pans and stuff like that. Everything like that. That's when I was taking basic training.
Now, did you basically enjoy the process? Did you like being there, or did you just want to
I loved it. I loved the Army. I loved it. I would have probably stayed. I probably would have stayed. I kicked myself after I didn't, because my commanding officer that I had when I was in the service was Manto, and he went with me over to Korea, and because he was a lieutenant, and I don't know how many years he had, but he was from. And then after the Korean War, they gave him another rank, and he stayed there. And I used to get letters from him and all stuff, and I always kicked myself because I never stayed. If I could have stayed, I imagine I could have been somewhere around within his companies, or somewhere I could have got transferred into his companies, I'm sure, because he was a good soldier, and I was a good soldier for him. He liked it. We got along good.
Well, the two of you wound up going through quite a bit together.
Yeah, we did it. He was a lieutenant.
All right. So you have the 13 weeks in basic training. Now, did you get any kind of specialized training, either weapons training or mechanical or anything else, or just the same thing a regular rifleman got?
Same training over day after day, day after day, day after day. We had to go the same thing. I never got no special training about going into the tanks or going into this or be a mechanic or nothing.
Right.
They didn't. They just kept us on there's walks and marches and stuff like that.
Okay, so you had kind of the standard infantry training at that point. Now, you finished the 13 weeks. What happens after that?
What happened? What?
After the 13 weeks of basic training?
Well, after 13 weeks of basic training, they give you a week to come home, and we come home by train. And I went here in Grand Rapids. My folks picked me up. I was home for a week. Then I take the bus to, after I did that, I took the bus to Fort Lewis, Washington.
All right.
And I stayed at Fort Lewis, and that was where I was stationed at Fort Lewis, Washington.
Okay. Now, how long did it take you to get to Fort Lewis on a bus?
It seemed like it took me a couple of days. I'm not sure. I don't recall because I don't not much paid any much attention really. We got on that morning. I think it was down 10, and we got there that day or the next day or something. I can't remember. I don't want to say because I don't really recall how long it took.
It may have actually been a little bit faster than some of the train trips,
Well,
because
it
on a
might
bus
have
you
been
just keep
faster
going.
than it might have been faster than a train for all I know. I don't know that.
Yeah, because the train sometimes would have to stop and wait in different places and so forth, and it might take 3 or 4 days sometimes to do that. Okay, so you get out there. Now, do you remember what time of year it was when you got out to Washington?
Let's see. It took my basic in November, 13 weeks. In November, December, January. It must have been out there. We got out there probably March, February, March. Almost in February and March, I guess.
All right.
It was nice out there. It was, like I said, it was winter.
Now, at this point, were you assigned to a specific unit?
I was assigned to the 4th RCT combat team. And I was with the 4th RC combat team all the time that I was in the States. And then we went to, after that, where the first Veterans Day could come. I think it was Memorial Day. We all went down to Washington to see the President of the United States and marched in front of the Capitol. And we took a convoy. We went down by truck, and we all went down there, and we stayed there. And then we did practicing outside in the big long barracks they had there, and we did. And then all of a sudden after that, well, they took us up at Mount Rainier to learn us to ski. I never been on a pair of skis in my life. And they learned me, and I took a lot of spills, but I finally got so that I could go. Then they had me on snowshoes. They'd walk us around on the big Mount Rainier hills there, but you couldn't get too close to the edge because of the, afraid you had to come down.
Right.
So they'd all warn us about that. And
Now, do you know why you were learning to ski and use snowshoes?
yes, because my next journey was to Alaska. I went up in Alaska, and I stayed up in Alaska. We went from there. I come back, and we were back probably 4 months, 5 months, something like that. I can't exactly remember the dates, how many months that we was back, and then we all got aboarded the bus, and we took us to the boat, and then we took a boat to Alaska.
Okay. Let's back up again a little bit. Can you describe what life was like at Fort Lewis while you were there?
Oh, I love Fort Lewis. It was a nice basic. We went to here. They had nice PXs in there, and they had nice everything at Fort Lewis, guys. In gym and stuff and everything, and you wanted to do, you could do. And then you had on the weekends, you'd have to write your name in if you wanted to take a pass to go to town or something. You'd have to sign out or something. But I never went much places. I mostly stayed right there at the base.
Now, where did you go in Alaska?
I went up to Fairbanks. We landed at Fairbanks, and we got there. We went up to, they called it 26 miles north of Fairbanks, the name of that place. And that's all I remember. But now, because I know there's a name for it, because you could just see, and we had us out on, while we was there, we was looking out for the Russians, because the Russians are down here, and we could see them down below there fishing in the water in the boat. We could see them because it was summertime. It was warm.
Okay. Well, that probably wouldn't be very close to Fairbanks then, because Fairbanks is right in the middle of the state.
Fairbanks is here, and we had to take trucks and go 26 miles up the road in these trucks, in these 2x2s, to go up there to the bases. But we was between Fairbanks,
And Anchorage, maybe?
Anchorage.
Because Anchorage is on the coast, and then Nome is off on the west coast.
Yeah, there was Russians. What was the name of that? other one, I can't think of the name of it. The Russians say they had a. We looked down over that mountain and looked down at them there,
Mm-hmm.
but I can't think. Can't think of it. It's been so long.
Yeah. Well, over in there are parts of Alaska, in western Alaska, you're pretty close to the Bering Straits in the area where the Soviet Union is just on the other side, and there's a couple little mountains and little islands in between, and they're there, and then the fishing boats would be out along there. So at some point, you're close enough to the coast then to actually observe the Russians.
I wasn't going to say. I don't want to say, but anyway, that's we's up there, and then we was there for I'd say probably 3-4 months, maybe a little longer. And then we come back to the States and did the same thing. We've come back by boat back to the States, and I was stationed at Fort Lewis again.
Okay. Now, in principle, when should your enlistment have expired? When would you have gotten to the end of that?
I should have got out, but in 48, 49, 50, I should have got out in 51 when I should have got out. And Truman extended me from anybody that was going to get out in 50 to 51 had extended another year. Yeah, that's what happened.
Right.
Well, I probably wouldn't have been a prisoner of war either if I'd have listened to my commanding officer after I told him that I had 2 men here, and he loaded them on a jeep. You see, getting in Korea. Well, I probably wouldn't have been because my 2 guys were dead, but I had shrapnel in me, but I just thought it just nicked my skin, you know. I had nothing, so all he did was just put a Band-Aid on me, and I quit bleeding, you know. So I told him, Commander, he said, well, okay, you come on down with me and Sergeant Bates. So I stayed with him, and he said, you be my radio man. But I could have went back with his 2 dead men, back too, because I was bleeding, and I still have the shrapnel in me. So,
all right. Well, that is getting ahead of the story a little bit.
no,
So we want to kind of go back again. So basically, you finish in Alaska, you come back down again to Fort Lewis, and then were you in Washington at the time the Korean War started? Then were you in Fort Lewis?
I was Fort Lewis in Washington.
All right. And then
I was in the 4th RCT combat team at that time. Then they transferred me when I got on the boat.
Right.
Said I was going to be with the 23rd Infantry, 9th Regiment.
Right.
Now that's all I know, and that's the way my discharge comes back. The 23rd Infantry, 9th Regiment. So.
Okay. Well, anyway, that's basically the 23rd and the 9th are both regiments that are in the 2nd Division, and it may be that at some point or other your official status got shifted from one to the other.
Well,
but when you were out there and in the field in Korea, you were serving with the 23rd Regiment?
Yes.
Is that, okay. That's the kind of thing that people will want to make sure they have straight as they look at the record. Okay. So now they load you up on a boat in Washington. They're sending you over to Korea. Do you remember what kind of ship they had you on?
I don't remember I don't even remember the name of it. I wouldn't even dare to say what the name was. But we got way out in the boat, way out. We was a long ways from shores, and I don't know how many days we was on the water. But then all of a sudden they put us out there to practice, you know. They throwed a great big balloon out, you know, like this out there. And they had us guys with our machine guns, because I was a machine gunner. And they had us try to see if we could hit that. Well, the water going like this, up and down, you know, waving up and down. Why, I laid on a machine gun and I didn't even get near it. I could see it going all around it and down under it, and I never got even near it, and I was trying to get my gun to go either way. Everybody laughing at me. He said, well, we don't have to worry about losing any Koreans. He said, you can't even shoot straight. So I said, I can't hit it. So then they put another guy down on it, my machine gun, and they did. And then they had some of the guys come up with a fire, standing there with their guns to shoot it. And they never did. We just waved by at it when we were left there. We spent, I don't know, hours and days at it, and we never did hit it. Spent a lot of bullets out there in the water just trying to hit it.
Of course, you were with the Army and not the Navy. So if you're in the Navy, you've got to hit that kind of thing when you're going up and down. Maybe in the Army, you're going to be on land when you shoot something.
Yeah.
So it works a little better. Okay, so is that the main thing that you remember about the trip over, was
That's
the target
the only
practice?
thing that I can remember about
Okay.
it. We had nice meals.
Mm-hmm.
We had nice meals on the Navy ship.
Yeah. And,
My brother, he was a cook on the ship, but I can't tell you the name of the ship that he had, but he was a cook on the ship. But when I went over to Korea, and then he was bringing the dead and the wounded back from Korea, and he got discharged just 2 or 3 weeks or months ahead of me, just before I did. Then they asked me, when I got patriated from Korea from the prison camp, they asked me where I wanted to go to the closest home, and I said Fort Knox. Great Lakes. That's where my brother was, and when I got there, he was discharged. So I said,
all right. Okay, now we're going to go back. Was the weather good when you were going over the ocean?
what?
Was the weather good when you were sailing across the
Oh
ocean?
yeah, the weather was nice. We didn't have such a bad weather. Only they told us that they said that the bow was cracked or something. I don't know what that meant, but anyway, they said they're taking care of it. Just taking in a little water, but they're taking care of it. So I didn't know what that was.
Right.
So it was new to me about being on a ship. But as far as that is, we made it over there. And
Right.
I made it back home.
Okay. Now, where did you get off the ship? Was it in Korea or in Japan or?
We got off right there at the right down at the bottom.
At Pusan?
Yeah, right there where they wiped out everybody. They said everybody's gone from the 24th, and we thought we'd have to land up in Chungcheon, up further up and stuff. But we didn't. We landed right down at the bottom, and we went straight up. When we went into a lot of snipers as we was going on up, but we eliminated a lot of that. And then there was behind us after we got going, they were shooting us in the back because there's a lot of snipers. Those snipers were terrible.
Okay. So basically what's happening is you're joining the 2nd Division essentially as a replacement when you get there. And so the regiment has been there because they were fighting along the Pusan perimeter. But by the time you got there, the North Koreans were already beginning to retreat.
Yeah,
Okay.
they were going back.
Yeah, they were
'Cause
leaving.
They were afraid, because we had machine guns and mortars and bazookas and everything we had, and we weren't letting anything not go.
Right.
And then we had artillery. We lined up back there. They brought in that big artillery. I don't know where that come from, but a different big. And when them guns go off, boy, I'll tell you, they really let off a lot of noise. My gosh, I tell you, it's a wonder it didn't break some eardrums. But maybe that's how I lost a lot of my hearing. But nevertheless, why, them big guns are powerful and they shoot miles.
Right. Okay.
And they scared a lot of people, I'm sure, in Korea.
All right. So you join the unit, and then you basically you kind of march kind of the length of the
walked all
peninsula.
way. When I went through every hill in Korea till I got to the Yellow River. And we had, after I was on Alliance for, I think it was a month or more, we was on Alliance, they moved us back and put another up in front of us, another regiment up in front of us. And maybe that's why they call it the 23rd Infantry 9th Regiment. Maybe the other regiment moved up and took our place.
Right.
While we moved back so we could wash and clean up and,
Right.
and shave and clean up when they had us, and then we could get a good meal instead of eating out of our cans that they had dumped hot
Right.
water in this wash tub, and we'd go and pick one up out of there and run back to our hole.
Okay. Now, when you were making that march up the whole length of the peninsula, what did Korea look like to you? What kind of place
All
was it?
mountains. There wasn't nothing but mountains. Believe me, there was nothing. There was a hill. Some hills that we took was on them. We was on them for days and days, and then all of a sudden anyway, they had so many dead people. We was laying, falling on top of dead people. Trying, the machine gun was just going, and I'd be changing off with my machine gun. With
Probably shouldn't play with the antenna there.
During the day, see, I'd run it during the day, and the guys, they wanted to run it at night. Well, the commanding officer is the one that sets the rules. Because I was a machine gunner, and he wanted me on days when he could see me, I guess. And then that assistant, my assistant, he had it nights. Well, I lost a couple of assistants, so I had to pull a day and a night shift a couple times, but I had that machine gun all the way to the Yellow River.
All right. Now, as you were moving your way north, were you getting into very much fighting, or did that only happen?
Lot of fighting. We used a lot of. They were shooting into these. They had these holes in the mountains where people lived. I found that out after later on. I'll tell you. But there's found out that these holes that you see in the mountains, where they try to drop these white phosphorus to burn them out, you know, they call it, to burn them out of there.
Right.
Well, they used a lot of that over there in Korea because we tried to burn them out because, you know, you just could not get them out of there and they'd be in there. And still after you throw one in there and it sets it on fire, it'll still, later on, you hear they're back up there shooting out of there again because there's thousands and thousands of them that can stay inside under the ground, underground, like I was for a month, and you wouldn't believe that underground, what holes they have under the ground, while I was going through from South Korea to North Korea, and that's where they were getting all their stuff. They had a storage shed right under the ground, and they were bringing stuff right out, and that they would be shooting all the time. They could bring a mortar out and shoot right out. The next thing you know, we try to get them before they shoot at it. But anyway, that's the way they were doing it to us. And oh, I mean, we wounded a lot of Americans, wounded a lot of people.
Right.
But I was awful lucky. I just gotta thank the good Lord. I tell you that. I don't know how I ever made it through back, but I did. A lot of them bullets go by you, you're saying, buzz, buzz, buzz. And I'll tell you something. One of those could have been me, you know. It just missed me.
Right.
I just fought on them hills, so we were laying on the top of Americans and Koreans and everything else for days trying to. Then we'd dig a hole because I always believed in it, and if I had to, we had a lot of dead people laying around, or we'd pull them arms this way and lay them that way and use them for a foxhole, you know. And we just had to put up with that, and that's how we did. And we'd keep them so we'd have them for our support. And we'd move forward. Boy, some places we couldn't dig in, and that's where we had so many dead Americans and so many dead Koreans, and we just piled them up in a pile, and that's how we kept right on it going.
Okay. Now, did you have South Korean forces serving alongside you?
You betcha we did.
Okay.
I had Koreans, and we could talk English, and I had Koreans right in my own squad, so that we could interpret and tell. And that's when I had this Korean run back to my commanding officer several times and tell him that the Chinese are coming. And he says, "No, John, they're friendly troops." He'd come back, tell me they're friendly troops. I said, "Well, I got two dead here, one, and then I've got shrapnel in my neck. Or I don't know if it's in my neck, but I'm bleeding from the neck." I didn't know I had shrapnel in my neck. I couldn't tell the difference. All I knew wasn't very big. It was just a little piece, and could have been a little stone picked up and hit me too. I had no idea. My commanding asked me, and he said, "Well, you want to go to medics with him?" And I said, "No, I don't want to ride with them two dead guys." So I didn't go back with him. Not that I shouldn't. I probably would have. I'd have probably got a Purple Heart if I had it, but I didn't get one, and I don't care if I never get one. But that's how
That's why you were still up there at the point when the Chinese got you.
Straight to the front to the day that it went, till I seen him coming, and when I seen him coming, I told the commanding officer, and he'd wind down, I'd radio and do everything we could. And then regimental headquarters way up ahead of us saying, "Oh, no, no." But I couldn't get in my head, when they're coming from the north, how can they be so friendly troops?
Sure.
That's what I could not get in my head for love of money. I just couldn't get it. So finally, when I told the runner, go down and bring my commanding officer. I want Manto here. Well, Manto, when I call for Manto, he's there, he would be there. He come up. And after he come up and see what trouble I was in, then he got on the radio and told him all back there what happened. And that was they didn't get a chance to talk to him too long because the next thing we know, we were moving back and we got captured within, probably 4 hours after he already told him that the North Koreans are coming over, or
the Chinese probably
were,
at
the
that point,
Chinese
yeah.
were coming over.
Yeah.
They're not friendly troops, they're Chinese.
Yeah. Well, apparently the High Command had convinced itself that the Chinese were not there. There are apparently hundreds of thousands of Chinese in North Korea waiting for you, but they
would, but you can't get that in the big shots' head to this day,
Well,
that they were, and we were right there watching them walk right over.
Right.
I was right up on the line, and our machine gun, and I was shooting them, and I was shooting right and left at them. And we was knocking them down, just like flies. But the commanding officer, when I seen Manto, I says, Jesus, I don't know. I'm supposed to be. He says, yep. He said, I don't care what they say. You just keep taking them till I get back. So I just keep my machine gun just a-blatting away. And then he says, all of a sudden, after a while, I filled the box up again, and I started with another rack, machine gun full of lead again. And he got the buck over the side of them, my assistant did, and I started going spraying, spreading out there with a 30 caliber machine gun, and I was still hitting them and out there. And finally, when the commanding officer, Manto, says, you move back after I get here, he called the other squads off the hill. And we all formed back there with a tank and the equipment we had, and then we moved back. We moved back. Oh gosh, I told him about 10 o'clock that morning. It was about 3 that afternoon is when we started moving back. When I moved back at 3 that afternoon, that's when we got captured about 10 o'clock that night.
Okay. Can you kind of describe a little bit more what happens that day? You moved back from your initial position, and then were you waiting to be evacuated, or what were you doing?
We were back there waiting for the boss to get the orders from down there to move back. And when they told us to move back, we all got, the commanding officer had his Jeep, and his driver and everything. And I walked back with the rest of them and everything. I took my gun, I had my machine gun with us and everything, I walked back and had the bullets. And we got back there, and then that's when we got overrun. When we got back there at 10 o'clock that night, we were overrun.
Now, can you
The
describe...
Koreans come around and tell us. He said, the Chinese are coming, the Chinese are coming. Well, I said to the my commander, let's get out of this building, because we was in a mud shack. I said, let's get out of this building, let's get out in the ground out there. Oh no, we're going to stay here. And Bates, he said, well, we'll stay right here. Well, gee, when they put that big bright light on that building where we were, this mud shack, you put that bright light on, and all of a sudden, God, you couldn't see nothing. And you put your hands up and come out, with commanding officer, the sergeant went out first, then lieutenant, and I was the last one. And I had the radio, but I couldn't jam that radio. I couldn't do anything with that radio. I had to try to hit it on the ground and try everything I could to jam it up so they could use it.
Right.
But I couldn't do it. And I tried to radio to them that night and tell them that we was in trouble. But we couldn't get any response back there. Must be sleeping.
Right.
And we couldn't get no response. So 10 o'clock they took us.
Okay. So basically what happens is, you're warned by the Koreans that the Chinese are coming, but your lieutenant wants to stay where he is. He's waiting for orders, basically.
Waiting. That's all you do.
Okay. You just
Hurry up and wait.
Right. And so then the Chinese come up and they find your position. They shine a big light at it, and they make you come out. Did they shout to you to tell you to come out? Did they come into the house?
Well, they shot in there into the mud shack at us 3 or 4 times with a machine gun. Just lucky nobody was hit.
Right.
Because if they shot through the door, and nobody was in the doorway, we side of the doors.
Right.
I was this way on Manto, and Bates was that way. So we got out of there.
Okay.
And
But did they stop shooting then? And
yeah, they stopped, and they said, so finally, he says, "You come out, or we're gonna rattle the building."
Mm-hmm.
Well, what I said, "What do you mean rattle the building?" To that, Manto says he means he's going to open up and spray us all right out of here. So he says we're going to get killed if we don't open the door.
Mm-hmm.
So Bates went and opened the door,
Mm-hmm.
and when he opened the door, why, then the door swung open, and he walked out, and then the Manto walked out, and I followed with our hands
Right.
up like that. We had to have our hands up.
Okay. Now, were there a lot of other Americans with you at that time, or just the three of you?
Well, just the three of us was in that building,
Mm-hmm.
because I was there with a Manto. I probably wouldn't have been there, but he wanted
Right.
me in there because he looked at my neck while I was there. He looked at it again, and he put another Band-Aid on it because it was really bleeding. He put another Band-Aid on it. I remember that before I was captured.
Okay. Now, had the rest of the platoon already left, or was there no rest of the platoon?
They were all lined up. They all had a line. We had them all in a line.
Mm-hmm.
All the whole company was in a line. But that didn't make a difference. The Chinese went right straight through,
Mm-hmm.
and they blowed up our tanks and killed the guys that was in the tanks.
Mm-hmm.
They dropped a shell down in the
Mm-hmm.
tanks and killed all the guys that was in the tanks. They left them.
So your company was pretty well destroyed
We
then?
was demolished.
Yeah. All right. Now, it's night, and what happens to you? What do they do after you come out of the house? Then what happens?
Well, we come out of there. Well, they took us over and put us in a pig pen. That's where I was in a pig pen. And when I was in this pig pen, Manto, Bates, Manto, and me. We were just the three of us, and it's a little square thing.
Right.
We stayed in there all that night. And the next morning, God, I was hungry. Even though had nothing to eat that night, I was hungry. And the next morning they brought in some maize to me. And I said, "What the heck is that?" And Manto says, "It looks like pig feed."
So it's sort of hard corn.
Yeah, it was maize. It's little, like you feed birds, that maize stuff.
Or
there.
millet then.
Yeah, millet.
Millet,
Millet or whatever.
Because
it's called.
maize is field corn.
Yeah,
But
maize, little millet.
But millet,
stuff.
yeah, bird seed.
Yeah, bird
Yeah.
seed. And we fell at that millet. And God, we ate that, and they cooked that for us, and that's what we ate.
Mm-hmm.
And heck, then for that other dish was in another, and it was in a pig trough. They make get them down here, and I had little sides on, like a pig trough, just like a pig trough. Well, we were pigs anyway.
Yeah.
They probably pigs were fed out of it, for all I know. I don't know, but anyway, I grabbed that, and when I started to eat it, boy, I had an awful taste to it. I said, I guess they're going to have to eat it. So Bates said, "Oh, I can't eat it." So then they brought us a couple of sticks, to eat that stuff with. Well, hell, I couldn't
Chopsticks,
even
yeah.
hold it. I couldn't even hold a stick to hold that stuff on it. I didn't know how to do it. Well, I was hungry, so I just dove in like that, and then that's how I did it. And then that stick I had for some of that green stuff, I speared it and put one of that in my mouth, and that slid right on down. And that was, they told us, after I found out what it was, I found out that was seaweed. I didn't know what it was. I had no idea what it was, but it was seaweed. And then I found out afterwards about it, a lot about that seaweed. That has iodine in it. I didn't know that. And that's what kept some of us guys alive, was that iodine.
Mm-hmm. All right. Now, did they move you out of there the next day, or did you stay
Yeah, the
there?
next day they moved. The next morning we got up, and then after we had breakfast, about noon, they took us and got 6 of us out of here, few here, few here, few here, few here. And then we got into one bunch there that, man, he was just rattling his mouth off. I said, I told my commanding, who was that soldier? He's an American soldier, you know. And he come with MacArthur from the 24th, I guess, over here in the States, He was over with MacArthur in Japan. And so he must have joined the 23rd along with us, the ones that were alive and able.
Right.
And so he was with us, and gosh, when he got there, he was running his mouth off and running it off, saying things I don't even know what he's talking about in Chinese or Korean or any kind of language, whatever. By gosh, it wasn't long. He wasn't getting them Chinese and Koreans, or if it was Koreans that grabbed him, or the Chinese that grabbed him, or who grabbed him.
Well, you're probably mostly with the Chinese at this
Or it
point.
probably could have been the Chinese. I don't know. That's why I say. Yeah, and then they throw the rope up in a tree, right outside there, and flip that rope up there like that. And I said to my commanding officer, I hung it on to him like a dear life, you know, because, you know, I'm just a young kid.
Right.
Never seen all this guy. He was in a war before, you know. He was been in the Second World War. My lieutenant was, so he knows what war is. And so I was listening to everything that he was telling. And gosh, the next thing you know, they put a rope around him and they pulled him just like he is standing there. Up he goes. And after he's still flapping his arms around and saying words I don't know what matter with that guy. I said to the command, I said, you know what he's saying? And they answered, no, I don't know what he's saying, but the Chinese knows what he's saying, or the Koreans knows what he's saying. So, God, he was up there, oh, Jesus, I'd say higher than the ceiling you got right here. And all of a sudden, they let him go. I thought he was dead. Then he moaned and groaned and carried on. Yeah. Finally, they unbuckled his pants, you know, there, and tried him up by the hind legs, you know. I thought, well, what the heck is the matter with him now? What are they going to do with him? God, he left his shoes, so they cut his clothes off of him, because he had his shoes on. They cut his clothes right off of him. And he was swinging his arms around, and they'd hang on to him, and he was pulling them Koreans around like this with his arms, or Chinese, whichever they were. And finally they had enough of him, and they hung him up there with his shoes on, feet, and got him up there with no clothes on. He's hung up there. He was swinging his arms and calling them, and he was spinning around up there. And they also got a hold of him. His arms, they loaded him down again so that one could get him. And he tried to reach for his hands, and they couldn't grab a hold of his hands because he was going like this all the time. And finally, and a lot of the Americans were over there trying to push the Chinese away and stuff. I didn't get over there because I see there was a lot of more friction from the commanding officer hung on to me and just said, stay right here. So him and me and Bates, we stood there and with a bunch of other guys. Next thing you know, they pulled him up in there and they finally got a hold of his hands in one hand, and then he had a hold of the other hand, and then that guy was trying to kick with his legs and moving his head around. And man, talking, I don't know what he was saying, but anyway. Then this guy come over here with a knife. Jesus Christ, to get a knife was probably that long. And when he did, he opened him up from here down to his, where we could see his heart beating. We stayed there for a while. And then he says, if you guys, and the Chinese or Korean or whoever said that in English, told us, he says, up a so or something like this, it's or be good or something. If you don't, you, like that. Boy, I'll tell you, it wasn't long, and everybody was as quiet as a mouse.
Now, was this man, you said he was an American soldier, was he?
He's an American soldier from the, probably, I'd say, a mate, so my commanding officer said he was probably from the 24th Infantry. That's what he said, because he was over, he come with MacArthur.
Right.
He come over when MacArthur, and he kept saying something about MacArthur all the time. So, you know, he was always talking about MacArthur, how good he was, and this and that. That we did know that. He used that kind of how good he was, and all that.
But he just seems to have been trying to bait the Chinese into killing him. Was that what he seemed to be after, as far as you could tell?
I don't know what he was trying to do. I don't know what he was trying to do. I have, to this day, I went and talked to my commanding officer in Montana. I went down to see him several times in the airplane. I went over and talked to him. I said, why? You know, when I went to talk to him, his wife was in the house. She says, well, why didn't you tell me about that, John? Why didn't you tell me, Dad, or Manto. She said to her husband, she says, how come you didn't say, why would I want to tell you that stuff? He says, that don't mean nothing to you. I said, you're my wife. You don't have to know that kind of stuff. But that's, you know, there's a lot of people that don't know a lot of things that people should have known about back there during the war. Now, I may not have should have even said that, anything about that, but it was one of those things. I was a young kid. I was in my 20s. I have no idea why a man like that would want to do something like that to be killed. And that's what I couldn't understand.
Right.
And I don't to this day.
Yeah. But things like that do wind up happening in wars, and it's something that we on some level do need to be aware of.
You know, there's some bullheaded guys, you know, that just, well, you have that in all the services you go to. I've been there in the 1st platoon. They had a guy, he didn't do something. He come back they're supposed to be back at a certain time on his pass. He showed up a half hour late, being drunk or something. Well, they make him go out there and dig a 6x6 out there, and he'd have to dig that hole. My gosh, when I was in Fort Lewis, he had to dig that hole, and then the officer said after he got it dug, he said, fill it up. And that, that's how they made them mind. Otherwise, you just wouldn't have no control over these guys.
Yeah. Okay, so after that particular incident, at this point, you've got to be really pretty scared. You don't really know what's going to happen next.
I didn't know what was going to happen to I didn't know if I was going to go down the road. They were going to open up on us, and there was probably 25 or 15, 25 of us right there. I don't know. I didn't know if they was going to open up and fire at us and kill us all or nothing. I had no idea what they were. I was like, Manto was God to me, you know.
Yeah, it's kind of a
But
good thing at least.
when I run back, though, when I left the machine gun after they were shooting at us, you know, I took my machine gun. Manto told us to move back, and I said, there, all of a sudden, so I had to move back. So the guy says, what way you going, John? I said, I'm going straight this way. And the guy, then my assistant said, I'll follow you with the ammunition. So he went with me. We got out there, and all of a sudden, picked up machine gun. I got probably halfway across to where my commanding officer was. He got shot here. He says, John, I'm hit. I stopped. Right then I stopped and looked. You wouldn't believe, a white wand, I'm just like white. It was just as white as snow, come right over top of me. I stopped right there, and I stopped. And when I stopped, look, I could see the bullets going all around me, just plowing into the ground, just going barreling to the ground. Well, so I kneeled down, and I said, well, I can't leave you. So I picked him up and puts him on my back, and puts his shells over here, and picks him up. I picks him up, and I carried my machine gun. And I said, now you hang on, because I can't carry you. Just put your arms around my neck and head down, as hold as you can down on my belt, I says. So he did, and he did. When we got there, we got down to this building. And he says, I can't hold no longer, John. I said, okay. And right then, I could see Manto over there, and I hollered at him. I said, Manto. I hollered, and he come. And he brought 3 guys. They picked him up. Another one that went on the boat. Then a Manto, he took his Jeep. We took the Jeep and went over there. The Chinese didn't shoot at that Jeep because it had a marking on it. I don't know what that meant, but there was a mark on it. And that commander said, take that Jeep. So that went over and picked them 2 guys up. And that's the one I could have went out on.
Right.
But I didn't go with them.
Right, and you didn't go. So now you've been captured, you've had this scene with this man being strung up and gutted. And then at that point, now, did they march you off someplace then?
They marched us to put us on a march. They marched us to this ground, hole in the ground. They put us in there, and then all of a sudden they picked us up with some trucks and stuff and took us back with some old clunkers that took us back there to this, I'd say, oh gosh, we was back there quite a few. Then we got off and walked because the road was so bad. And then they'd turn around and go back and get some more, and then they'd bring us here, and then we'd walk. And then while we was walking, then they put us, and finally we ended up walking to a cave. There's a big cave there who we walked into, and we all walked in that big cave. Where the man and us walked into it. They had lights, you know, all around, down through there, hundreds of lights. It was generated, and they had just like a home. You could walk around, beds. There's a bed for everybody, thousands of beds in there. And that's where they kept. And they had one soldier laying in there. We see him, and they were pouring sake down him, trying to get that shrapnel out of his legs. Oh, geez, he was just covered with shrapnel. And and the Chinese were trying to get that out, and then they was pouring that sake down him to get him drunk or not, so he wouldn't feel it. Every now and then when they start to work on it, he'd scream, oh, Jesus. Finally, they got him up and then out. They took him, and they left him, put him up, and they took him out, and they put a white flag up at the hole, and then they walked down with this guy and took him back. They had a couple of soldiers take him back. I wished I would have been one of them, but I wasn't. And they had a couple of soldiers take him back with his white flag, and they waved out there, and they walked him back to the lines, wherever there was somebody to take care of him. I don't know how far they got. Maybe they didn't get far, but I don't know. But they took him out of that place.
But they took somebody who was badly enough injured. They were
yeah.
going to give him back to the Americans.
The Chinese are trying to get him back to the Americans because they knew he wasn't going to make it if he didn't.
Right. On the whole, I mean, is this cave area, is this where you wound up staying, or did you eventually?
This is where we stayed until we went on our 23-day death march. And then they moved us up along the Yellow River. They moved us up to the Camp 5, and that's where we had we lived on ears of corn, and we lived in these little homes until they took us all the way back up to the Yellow River. That's where I spent the rest of my 33 months.
Now, how long did they have you in that cave area, do you think?
A month. We was in there a little better than a month.
All right.
You know, a month.
And then at that point...
Every now and then they'd shoot down at us, you know. They'd scare us. They wouldn't shoot at us, but they'd shoot, you know, down in the hole. You know, and Jimmy, I'll tell you, then the Chinese, once in a while, one of the Chinese would holler at one of them. And when I don't know if he was telling him to shoot again in another half hour or whatever, but it's enough to keep you alerted.
Okay. Did they make any efforts to interrogate you or get information, or did they just bring you in? Not until after we got back to Camp 5. Then they started to coming around and saying to us when we moved into the camps. They never interrogated us at all until we had our own homes that they called homes for us in these mud shacks. And I was up there, and then they'd come around to us, and got Camp 3 and 5, and they'd come around to us and they'd say to us, I'd like to have you come down and write something for us. And I said, well, I can't write. I said, I don't know how to write. I says, I can't read or write. You know, and I told him that. I said, I can't read or write. So I never wrote a letter to my mother or dad. I never wrote a letter to my mother or dad, never. And I always had a guy by the name of Porches Wright. He was in the same building that I was in. He was a master sergeant. And I'd ask Porches, because he was a good friend in the 23rd Infantry, and he's the only one I knew that. And I'd ask him, and he's sure. So I'd sit down, and we'd sit there and write, and he'd talk and a little thing, and I'd mail it out. But the Chinese, they come around every now and then and want to know if you could do this. They give you cigarettes, they offer you cigarettes, they offer you sake, they offer you this and that. A couple of them guys that went down there to write some articles, God, they come back, they couldn't even stand up, they couldn't even walk, and I don't know what they wrote, if they wrote anything. But they really had cigarettes in their pockets, and they were drunker than a coon. Well, did they ever talk about what they wrote or what they were asked to write?
Well, they told me that they say they want you to write something against the United States. Well, I wasn't going to do that, because I going to do anything. I'd just give them RE 16, 26, 20, 45, my serial number, and I'm a corporal. That's all I would said. but I never wrote anything. I never wrote to my mother and dad, and even my mother and dad says to me, my letters that I got from Peking, China, it said on there, and it says, why can't you write, John? You know, when the Chinese were reading the letters to me, because they wouldn't let me have them, because I couldn't read, so they wouldn't let me have the letters that I first got. So finally, later on, when peace got better, well, they'd say, here, you can give it to you. Here's your letter, John. You let somebody else read it to you. But by the time the Chinese was reading it to me, they were trying to read it. Well, I could stand it right next to them. I'd have it read before they'd get it read, because there were words that they were trying to figure out, you know, and trying to say it in their language. That's how I got my mail.
Okay.
And then they took it away from me, and no, that did hurt, but I mean, I wasn't going to write anything against my Americans anyway.
Right.
I never did.
Okay. Now, you referred to the trip from the cave area to the prison camp as being a 23-day death march. Can you describe a little bit what happened on that trip?
Well, all we did on that march was they fed us ears of corn when I got there, and they told us not to eat snow. Well, see, when we went into that cave, it had not snowed. It was just bare ground. When we come out of there, we weren't dressed or nothing, ready for any winter.
Right.
We had no winter clothes yet. They had, and finally they gave us some winter clothes after we got started on the death march. They started giving out some winter clothes, and that's what we got. Then when we got to camp, where they put us for the 23, camp 5 or 3, then they come in with all blue clothes, big thick clothes we had for winter. But going up there, guys had their little democracy shoes and stuff on them. Some of them guys did, and a lot of them were barefooted. I don't know how they ever made it. And with no shoes, just some scuffers on. I tell you, that's their feet. A lot of them, well, I imagine they died. A lot of them did, because when I was at camp, we got up to the camp after I was on that death march, and come up to camp. Why, I was at camp there, and like Chinese had come around in there and say how many dead, you know. That's all they would say. And then they'd come out and say, we're going on a brush detail. We'd go on brush. I'd go out on brush. We had to have brush, because that's the only way we had to heat our stove under the ground. We had to go out with a bunch of it. And then the Chinese would say, how many are dead? Well, that's all he could say. Wu would say. And Wu had two interpreters, Wu and Wan. And all they'd say was, how many dead? And we'd say none. Well, then he said, well, come on, all you fall out, we're going on a brush detail. Well, that somebody was back there. It couldn't go. He was different aboard, but we didn't tell him that, because they'd be cutting us on chow. So we never told it. So we never relayed that until they was so stiff, you know. But then when we started finding out why they were dying, it was because they were eating this meals like we were, and they had worms in their stomachs, and the worms were starting to come out of their mouths. Well, when we started noticing that, well, then we take them, stretch them out, put them on a straw mat, take them up, and take them up on Boot Hill. Some of the guys wanted to take their dog tags off, because they said, well, I know this kid's mother and dad. Well, I said, well, I don't know. I said, if I was you, I wouldn't take any dog tags off, because they may be around someday when we're not here. Something might happen to you. I said, because I used to carry a lot of them up on Boot Hill. I carried them. Up on Boot Hill, I don't know how many times I made trips up there on that here and just dumped them over. Well, then after we had them there for the winter, why, spring we had to go up there and move them an arm and a legs, and we didn't have no dog tags, so we didn't know who this was or who that was or nothing. And they put them together and try to get them together up there and to throw some of that dirt on them. Well, that dirt was not like on top of a mountain. You don't get much dirt, you know. And a shovel they give you, it was a square shovel, and you didn't get much dirt on it. And so a lot of them people, they didn't get covered up good. And I don't know, looks like something animal got a hold of some of them and pulled them here and there or something. I don't know if it was dog or what it was that got a hold of them, but something got a hold of them and drug them all around. And they'd go up with masks on their face, and we'd have nothing on our hands, and then we'd have to go down to the river afterwards, and they'd give us soap and stuff, and we'd wash our hands and get cleaned back up, you know.
Okay. On the whole, how did the Chinese treat you while you were a prisoner?
Well, the Chinese treated me, I have nothing, I can't say that they treated me bad, but I had food, we had millet, maize, cracked corn, and seaweed, you know, and we have a pig during Christmas, I guess, and stuff they have, and stuff like that. But that's what we did. We had very little rice. I got very little rice. But far as being, but my insides was when I went one time and God, I was sick to my stomach enough. So he says to me, he says, well, I want you to take some garlic. So I went up there and he gave me a cup of garlic, you know. I had to peel all that stuff off, and I had to eat garlic. And I said, I just eat garlic. And he said, I want you to come back the next day. Well, the next day I come back, and he says, how's your bowel movement? And I says, it's all right, it's loose, I'm just like a water.
Right.
And he says, well, he says, I want you to eat another one, pot. He says, no worms come out? I said, no, why, am I supposed to have worms? He says, well, he says, you complained about your stomach. Oh my gosh, I ate another pot of those little garlics. Next day, when I went to go out there, I could feel my stomach really acting up. I went there, and all of a sudden, they come out about that far. I see worms coming out about that far. Well, then I got a hold of them with my hand, and I pulled on them. And I've got a lot of blood and everything out of them. Well, then I told him, so I had to take a third batch of garlic powder. And that garlic is what put them guys out of their misery, because the garlic, they don't like they don't like garlic because I guess it's
right.
And that's what only reason I'm alive today is because I had them worms and they got them out of me, where a lot of guys didn't eat that garlic like the guys had given them. And doctors that give them garlic, they wouldn't eat it because they didn't like it.
They didn't like it, yeah.
Well, I didn't like it either, but I didn't want to go up on Boot Hill.
Well, you had seen what happened to the guys with worms, and once you knew that's what it could be.
When I seen them guys, when I taken them over to Boot Hill there, and I'd see them worms coming out of their mouths, and we was carrying them over on Boot Hill, and they were closed on and everything, and these worms were sticking out of their mouth about like that. Well, I sure didn't want that to happen to me.
All right. Now, how did you spend your time when you're in the prison camp for a long time? What did you do all day?
Well, the time we was in there, well, they sent me to, one time they put me on a barge and took me to get a big load of wood. We brought a big load of wood in there. We had to unload that. That's the first thing we had to do, is unload that for the Chinese, because they had their place, you know, down there. They had their own place. We had to unload that and put it on. It's all blocked wood. And they had a wheelbarrow, you call it a wheelbarrow, with wheels on it. You know, they're fancy wheels that comes out with wood or bamboo or whatever you call that thing, wheelbarrow. That's how we carried it. We didn't put much on, but that's why you wheeled it up there and put it up to their hill. And you couldn't because you had to climb hill with it, so to push it up there. And then we tied a bamboo, they had some kind of a straw bamboo that they made for a rope, and they want to pull on the front, and somebody steady it back here, and that's how you pulled that, unloaded that wagon. And that trailer, we had, oh gosh, I don't know how many times the trips, and then after we got unloaded, well, we got on it and went down the right. Oh God, we went, I don't know, we've probably gone, we never got back until night. We get back at night, and then while we were gone, they fed us on there. They give us rice, because the Chinese were eating rice, so they fed rice, and they had us some other kind of broth. So we was eating good when I was going back and forth on that, going to China to get wood and come back, because they had us a pile right over on the other side, and we just stand there and throw it one block to each other, and then we'd block it up, put it on the boat. And then they'd take that big board in the back there and move that thing here and paddle the boat up the river. We didn't. They didn't, because they knew how to do it. The Chinese run it up the river.
All right. Now, did you do that just once, or did you do it several times?
I only did it a couple times.
Okay.
And then I most generally stayed at the camp. I just sat around at the camp.
Right. Now, did they separate the officers from the enlisted men?
Oh, yes.
When you got to the camps?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. I thought I was going to stay with Manta, but I didn't. They moved him in one, where I was in 5 and 3.
All right. Now, can you describe a little bit just the physical living conditions? Were you in huts or houses, or
We
what
were
were
just mud houses. There's only there was 10 to 20 guys in one laid on the floor on a straw mat. That's how we laid. We stayed in there. They'd come around the first thing in the morning before they fed us and wanted to know how many was dead. And then after they told us, we told them how many's dead. Well, then it would be a long while. About 9 o'clock, 8, 9 o'clock, we'd get our breakfast. And then about noon, 1 o'clock, we'd get dinner. Then about 4 to 5, or 6, we'd be somewhere in them 3 times. We'd be getting something more to eat. They fed us 3 times a day.
now?
Then you had medicine. Then you had a sick call to go on. The Chinese made a sick call, so we had a sick bay to go. If anybody was sick, to report up to the so-and-so station, and that's how I went up there, because God, I had the shits just terrible. That it wasn't funny. I only weighed 100 pounds when I come back out of the prison camp. When I come there, and then after I got patriated, and they come around and told us we were going to be out of there. That was the best news I heard yet, and I says, boy, I can't wait till that day comes. And they didn't tell us what actually day it was going to be, but they said we would be going soon. That's all the word would come out, was going soon. We didn't know. And finally that one morning come, that was soon, they come out and says, all you guys get on this here truck when you're going back to the Patriot Village. And I said, boy, that was the best thing news I heard yet. And I got on there, we loaded up and got on. They went back to...
Now, do you have a sense of sort of what proportion of the men you were prisoners with sort of survived or died? I mean, did most of the men you started with survive once you made it back to the camp, or?
No, we lost a lot of men. I lost a lot of men. You know, it was in our company, in my platoon. They'd bring another bunch in the barracks that I was in. They just moved somebody from another barracks in, and then we got into a great big room after that. And then when they finally moved me down to Camp 3, they moved me into Camp 3. We had a room probably as big as this room right here, you know, a square, big room, probably 50, 60, 70 men in that room. And that's what they had us. Then we had us laying in there. They gave us one blanket to cover up with, and we clip in our clothes all the time.
I was asking you were about what kind of losses you had actually in the camps. That is, you arrive in the camp with a group of men when you first got there. Did most of those men survive the whole thing, or?
No, there's a lot of them in the camp that died. There's a lot of. I lost a lot of them. A lot of them. We just.
And it was mostly just because they got sick?
Most of it is malnutrition. That was the biggest killer of everything. People wouldn't eat, and the people wouldn't eat that stuff. That was 90% of the stuff. They wouldn't eat it. They didn't like the millet, the maize, the cracked corn, and stuff like that. And when I was on a death march, coming back there on a death march, we walked on that death march after coming out of there. They just would not walk. Some of them would. They took a chance of diving over the bank, and when they did, there was no, and you'd hear them way down there. God, they must have fell for miles down in banks and mountains, because you know how high the mountains were. And they were down there, and you could hear them hollering and screaming. Some of you wouldn't even hear anything, because were dead.
Mm-hmm.
So they were completely killed themselves just jumping over the cliffs.
Mm-hmm.
And one lot of them laid down along the sides, you thought,
Mm-hmm.
and they could. And then they'd hang there. First thing you know, they tried to pull themselves back up. They couldn't because their weight was holding.
Mm-hmm.
So then one of the gray eyes would happen to see them where the Chinese had a light, you know, at night. They had a
Mhm.
light on their head. They could see what's going on, a big bright light. It was just like that light that shined on me when I was
Mm-hmm.
taken captured. They had that, and they could see that whole bunch down ahead
Right.
of them. And all of a sudden, someone would go down, and then all of a sudden, he looked down over the bank. We did a couple of times with some of them guys when they looked and tried it, and they'd have us pull this American back up off of there, and then they'd throw a rope around him and pull him back up.
Mhm.
And boy, how they did punish him. They poked him with a bayonet in the butt
Mhm.
and in the back and everything else. And he was sore, so I don't know if them guys ever make it back or
Mhm.
made it alive or not, but I know they sure had a lot of gun pokes in the back.
Right. But the Chinese themselves were not simply killing prisoners along the march directly, or
No.
because it's a different kind of thing than the experience being captured by the Japanese in the Second World War, where more of that kind of thing happened. This was simply just very difficult physical conditions, and some of them were going over the side of the cliff. And
Yeah. Oh, there was
that
they
kind of thing.
jumped overboard, everything and all. Just like maybe they did the same thing in Japan. I don't know. But
yeah. Well, the Japanese did not treat prisoners very well. It sounds like the Chinese were making an effort to be.
Well, they were probably making an effort trying
Yeah.
to keep it. You know, they weren't really that. To me, I can't
Mhm.
say anything really bad that they didn't do for me.
Mhm.
You know, I was sick. I went up there to sick bay.
Mhm.
I went up there and I took their pill. I took
Right.
their stuff. I did what I did. I wanted to come home.
Mhm.
You know, I did what
All right.
what they did, and they saved my life.
Right.
If I wouldn't have probably went up to sick bay about my stomach,
Mhm.
I probably wouldn't have been here talking to you.
Right. Okay, well, they finally move you out of the camp. They bring you together now, and you've got a group of people. Once they have that group of men together there, what happens next in this process of getting to be repatriated and go home?
Well, they took us, and when we got us there to where we were repatriated, well, then the Americans loaded us on a jeep
Mhm.
and took us back to a place back there where they were interrogating us. And
Mhm.
they says to me, he says, I'd walk in, he says, you got a headache or how you feel? And I told him, I said, I don't feel very good. He says, well, you go in that line. And they said, the guys that said, well, I feel all right.
Mhm.
He said, you go this way. So the way I went, why, I flew back to the States, and then I flew right down up to California. I went to, left there, I went to, I flew out of the helicopter out of Japan, out of Korea,
Mhm.
to, and then I got, flew from a helicopter, you know, after we got
Mhm.
repatriated, so it was an American
Right.
helicopter. Then they flew me to another station, Hawaii, I think,
Mhm.
or something, I think. And
Okay.
then from there, Hawaii, they put us on, and then we flew from Hawaii right back to the state to California. I think
Mhm.
that's a straight shot on a four-motor
Right.
plane. You know, a lady come there and asked me, gave me an apple on the plane, and I was chewing on the apple, and she asking me questions
Mhm.
and stuff. Yeah, and I was on my way back. Boy, I've never been so happy in my life.
Mhm. All right. Now you say you came back, and then once you get back to the States, then you get discharged at that point?
Well,
or-
they paid us off, and when I paid me off, well, then I took my money, and I had to go down probably a half a mile to this bank.
Mhm.
They told us where it was, and I put it in there and sent it to the Alta Bank.
Right.
That's how I did, and I put my money in that and sent it to the Alta Bank.
Mhm. All right. Now, did you have the option to stay in the Army at that point?
Absolutely, they told me I could stay in if I wanted or go out, and I says I wanted to get home.
Mhm.
I wanted to get out. Not that I was against any of the Army or anything, but I just had enough. My brothers and sisters never wanted to stay back in,
Right.
so I said, well, if they're not going to stay in, I'm not either. So
Mhm.
I didn't. And then after that, I went to work, got out, and and I worked on after I got out of the service, Conrad had a garbage truck in Lowell, so I got on that, worked for him for a year or two. Then I went to work for King Milling Company in Lowell, worked for him a year, and then I got a chance to go to work for the Road Commission, and I spent 36 years there for the Road Commission, Kent County Road Commission, and that's where I retired from.
All right. Now, to look back at the whole experience now, how do you think that your time in the service wound up affecting you? Did it change the way you looked at the world, or did you grow up there, or?
How you mean?
Well, I mean, you went through a variety of different experiences. Were you a different person when you got home
Oh, absolutely.
than you had been when you went off? And
Oh yeah, the Army makes a different person out of you. It ain't going to hurt anybody to go in the service. You learn a lot. I've learned a lot of stuff from being in the service. I've learned a lot of things about discipline. You know, the times you keep your mouth shut, or when you shouldn't talk, or when you should talk. You learn all that by being in the service. And, hurry up and wait. I've learned how to hurry up and wait. You have to have a lot of patience. You learn all those things by in the service as a military. You learn those things from that. You know how to dress. Where before you have to dress if you want to make an honor guard, or if you want to be up in front where you don't have to walk patrol at night. You have to be dressed and have your clothes looking nice, your shoes shined, everything, and you march in the parade to where you walk up to him, and the commanding officer picks a soldier to be in his office with him and sit there with him. And I got picked a few times. Well, it learns you to make a soldier out of yourself. You just have to learn to be a good soldier, that's all.
now, did learning to do that, did that help you get through the experience in the prison camp?
That helped me a lot, because you have to know what you do, to survive. And it's just like doing anything you do. You have to have your footlocker respected. Your bed is, when he dropped a penny or a dime on your bed, he wanted it to bounce off. He didn't want it to lay there. If he did, he'd pull the thing back, and you do it till you made it right. You learned. That's how they treat you in the Army.
Right.
And I mean, he was strict. I can't remember my officer in Fort Knox, Kentucky, but he was strict to us kids. And he was a West Point officer. We had a lot of West Points in Korea too. But they were going to turn the world over in Korea, but dang it, I'd have a West Pointer with me for about 2 or 3 days, and he was going to show us how he was going to take over. We'd lose him. He was a leader. We lost him. He was a leader, all right. We lost a lot of men too, but luckily I made her back.
Right. Well, I'm glad you did, and just want to thank you for taking the time and coming to talk to me today.
Okay.
All right.
You're welcome.
I never seen such desolation. I think we drove for a mile and there wasn't a building hardly standing.
Nobody knew what was going on. They called the situation fluid, but fluid means that nobody knew anything.
It was different. If I had done something else, I don't know what I would have done.